This is Chapter 5 in PowerPoint 3 of 3 for Week 1 of 1120. So this chapter, in our book, it looks at kitchen equipment. We're going to focus specifically on knife safety for this chapter. The learning objectives for this chapter are: number 1, know the 3 most essential kitchen knives as well as each of their associated functions. There are many different knives that you can buy. There are many different knives that you can use. There are 3 knives that will perform almost all kitchen functions. Know what these 3 are. Know what, in a very general sense, what each of their function is. Number 2, know the basic guidelines for knife safety and be able to apply these in lab. So you should have a grasp on what you do to avoid any type of injury or problem in lab with regards to knives. Number 3, be able to grip a knife and the food appropriately. So there's a certain way to handle the knife. We'll talk about that later on, and we'll talk about how you also hold the food. That's very important to understand. Holding the food safely and correctly is just as important as holding the knife correctly. And 4, we're going to go over the anatomy of a knife. There are a few different sections of it that you need to know. Pay attention to the main sections that we discuss when we go over this. As you can see, there are many different types of knives, and these knives in front of you only account for some of them. There are many knives with very specialized functions that are not included on this list. It's important to understand that each of these knives, although they may look very similar, each of these has a different purpose. And there are a few of these that are a little bit more versatile and can perform a wider range of function than others. And we'll talk about these in a few slides. The steak knife, that's designed to make very crisp cuts through very thick meats. The paring knife is excellent for making fine cuts and is used to skin vegetables and fruits. The bread knife that has a serrated edge, which is just like little teeth, which allows a very smooth cut through breads. A different knife would not create as clean of a cut. The cut would be a lot more crumbly and it would not be as smooth. A carving knife allows you to cut through very slim, thin slices of meat. The cleaver, big and heavy, and it can make it through big cuts. It's specifically designed for thick meat, thin bone, and large amounts of connective tissue. Regardless of the type of knife that you use, it will have a very similar overall anatomy that is outlined here. Will you be tested on this? No. But your life in lab will become a lot easier if you know where the handle, the heel, the edge, and the spine of the knife are. The handle is everything from where the black piece of the knife starts all the way down to the butt. So from the black piece, the right edge, to the left edge where the butt is, everything that you're going to grab is the handle. The heel is on the part of the blade that is closest to the handle. The spine is the very top of the blade, so you can't make any cuts with the spine. It's on the very, very top. And then the knife edge, that is what's going to make the cut. That's going to be the sharp section of the knife. Do you have to know all of the knives? No, but you should know the general function of these 3. What you have are the chef knife, the serrated knife or the bread knife, and the paring knife. And with these 3 knives, you can perform almost all of the essential kitchen tasks. The chef's knife is the most versatile of all the knives, and it can perform the majority of kitchen tasks. It could be considered the all-purpose knife. Let's jump down to the paring knife. This knife is very small. It allows you to make fine cuts. Think of skinning fruits and vegetables. This knife can make that very fine cut. It can also cut inside in very tight areas. Say, for example, the insides of a bell pepper. Cutting with this knife would be a lot easier than going with a very heavy, thicker, larger chef knife. Number 3, the serrated knife or the bread knife. This is primarily for bread cutting. It may have a few other functions. You could use a serrated knife to cut tomatoes, but mainly this is going to be for bread. While you're not going to use this knife extensively, there is no other knife that can cut bread like one with a serrated edge. So the serrated edge means that it has those little teeth, very tiny teeth, along the edge of the blade. Here are pictures of those three essential kitchen knives. The first knife at the very top is the chef's knife. Again, that is the all-purpose, the knife that can be used for the majority of kitchen functions. It's the biggest and has the thickest blade compared to the paring knife and the serrated knife. The paring knife, again, is responsible for those fine cuts. So it can get into very tight areas. It can also peel the skins of fruits and vegetables. The serrated knife is for the bread. So it can make the cuts through the crust of bread very smoothly because it does have those edges, those little teeth along the edge of the blade. So if you see the edge of the blade, you can see how there's little indentations. And that is the main characteristics of a serrated knife. When you're using a knife, always remember to keep the knife sharp. This is the #1 rule of knife safety. The majority of knife-related accidents, believe it or not, are relating to using dull knives. The reason this is that the dull knives cannot make a very smooth cut through foods. So if you're going through a tough food, there's a greater chance that that knife can get away from you and either come at you, come away from you and injure somebody else, but there's a greater chance of it cutting you. Now a sharper knife will make a deeper cut, but a duller knife is harder to control. Whenever you're holding food, make sure that you're cutting away from the hand that's holding the food. Never cut towards it. Never put yourself in the chance or in the position where that knife can come at your fingers or your hands and make a cut there. It may be tempting, but never use the palm of your hand as a cutting board. So you may want to hold the food and then cut through the food. Knives are very effective at cutting through food, and you will notice if you do that, there's a good chance that it will get all the way through and make a good cut on your hand. If the cutting surface that you're using is not stable, it needs to be stable. If the cutting board is moving around or is on an unstable surface where it's not going to be able to stay steady when you apply pressure to it, you need to find a new location for that board. If that board gets away from you, there's a greater chance that knife will get away from you, that it will come at you, that it will slide and affect another student as well. So always secure your cutting board. And the main thing to really understand with this is that you just need to be alert and aware whenever you are using knives, because you are using some incredibly useful but dangerous tools for the kitchen. They were going to do a good job of cutting through meat. They can do a good job of cutting through you as well. Here's a quick video that shows you how to use a knife steel to sharpen a knife. The most important thing to consider is how the person is gripping the knife, how they are gripping the steel, and then how they are moving the knife towards them when they're making that motion. Notice that it's a very gentle, very light. It's not very hard. You do not have to apply much pressure to the steel with the knife to get it to stay sharpened. Just nice and gentle and let it come at you nice and slow. Never anything rough or too fast. When using a knife, it's very important that you have a good grip on the knife itself and then on the food that you're cutting as well. If you're gripping the knife appropriately, you're going to be able to get an effective and efficient cut and then also significantly reduce the risk of a knife accident. And it's just funner when you're able to get a good grip on the knife because you're able to make those cuts so smoothly and just so well, and they look so good when you've made that final cut. When you stabilize foods, it also allows for a more standard cut and then again minimizes your risk for an accident. For stabilizing the food itself, you want to do one of two holds, the claw grip or the bridge hold, and we'll talk more about what these are in a few slides. Again, holding the knife correctly is very important to a good, clean cut. The two pictures on the left show very weak holds. With both of those, you do not have much control over the knife. The third picture is a perfect example of how to have a good, clean cut and have a ton of control over the cut that you make with the knife. Notice where that middle finger is located and how the two fingers behind it are just pressed up nicely against that. Right where the handle meets the bolster of the knife. And look where the thumb is at, right against the top of the blade. The index finger is right against, it's applying pressure against and opposite of the thumb. This overall is going to give you a very tight hold and again a lot of control over that knife when you make the cut. The claw grip refers to how we hold the foods and not the knife itself. It is the most commonly used grip and is used to cut the majority of foods. Foods that are more slippery, so for example the first cut that we make with tomatoes or cucumbers or potatoes, we're not going to be able to have a very stable ground for those foods because they're going to be a bit wobbly. Once we make those cuts, we can go to the claw grip, but the claw grip is designed for any foods that will be stable, like half of an onion once we have that down on the table. When we make the first cut of the onion, the claw grip would not be effective, but since half of an onion is so stable, the claw grip will work in this case. Notice in this picture that the person's fingertips will never come in contact with the knife blade. During the cut, the knife is going to come up slightly and then come down and make the cut, but only come up slightly so it never goes above that last finger joint. The blade is going to weigh against that finger joint so that there's a good level of uniformity in that cut. And notice how that finger joint that is touching the blade, the rest of the hand is pointed away. There's a good amount of pressure that's placed from the fingertips on that food to keep that food stable, but the rest of the hand is pointed away from the blade to ensure that you do not put yourself at any type of risk when you do make that cut. The bridge hold is another way of holding food to stabilize it for cutting. Again, we're talking about holding food and not the knife. So foods that are rounded and less stable are more likely to be cut using this technique. So the initial cut of a potato is going to require the bridge hold, because what the bridge hold does is it applies pressure on both sides of the food during the cut, because if there was just pressure applied to one side, there's a good chance that that food would get away from you and you would not be able to cut it. Once you make that first cut, it might be easier to go to a cut like the claw grip, but if there's any type of instability where you need to apply pressure from both sides, you're going to want to use the bridge hold.